Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining me again. Hey, I'm Tim Laskus, and you're listening to The Tim Laskus Show. This is episode 78, and today's featured guest is George Newman. And George shares some inspiring stories and wisdom as a longtime entrepreneur. Man, I sat and I was listening to this episode again, and I just love listening to George. You are just going to be just sitting there going, wow, this guy is really wonderful and fascinating storyteller, and you're going to learn a lot because he just has tons and tons of wisdom that he shares. And he has a very cool book, which is called How to Survive in an Upside Down Economy, that covers self-employment and basically how to stay afloat without that job. So you're going to learn a lot. So sit back, get ready to enjoy another great episode.
The Tim Laskus Show, in search of entrepreneurial gold. Tim digs deep into the minds of his guests, entertaining, down to earth, and informative. Now, here's your host, Tim Laskus.
Welcome, George. Thanks for being on the show today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Tim.
Hey, I know you said you're out in hot Tucson, Arizona, but you love to go out and play tennis in like 100-degree temperatures.
At 6 a.m.
Oh,
is when I go out to play tennis.
God,
And it's usually 75 at that time.
So you got to get your tennis session in right before the heat of the day starts to hit.
Oh, yeah. Actually, at the 24-hour low, to be exact, which is 6 a.m.
You got to have your day planned out. And what's the best thing about living in Arizona?
Well, the best thing is that we don't get cold winters, we have no earthquakes, and we have no tornadoes.
Hey, there you go. I'm sold. I'm moving out there. Hey, George, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and what are you currently working on?
Well, I'm a retired newspaper reporter who found it necessary to go to work for himself when the newspaper industry crashed. And as we all know, newspapers are a dying breed. And I call myself retired, but actually my wife and I are busier now than in the days when we worked from 9 to 5. So I don't think we're ever going to physically retire.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to slow down. You get rusty.
That's right. Absolutely. I mean, I know people who have retired at 65, got their pension and gold watch, and a year later they were gone. They sat on the couch, watched television. That's not for us.
Yes, for sure. Now, you talked about being retired as a newspaper reporter, and then you were kind of forced out of work. So what happened then?
Well, what happened was I found I had a couple of books that I had published, and on the side when I was still working full time. And I thought I was going to go into the book publishing business because the first one was a great success. It was called 101 Ways to Be a Long Distance Super Dad. And it was just the right time, and I got a lot of publicity and interviews, and I was on the CBS Morning News, and it went real well. And I said, oh, this is great. I'm going to publish books. Well, I found out that you don't get rich publishing books, and if you get a couple of duds, then you have a garage full of books, and it didn't work out real well. But luckily, one day, phone rang. And there was a lady on the other end, and she said, are you the George Newman who used to work for the Mercury News in San Jose? And I said, yes. Well, she said, about 2 years ago when you were at the paper, and I got your number from the newspaper, you did a nice story about our business club for women. It was a women's business club. And she said, I own a mortgage business, and I want to send a newsletter every month to my investors. Do you think you could help me with this? And I said, certainly. I had no idea. I had never put out a newsletter, and but I figured I could do that. And so I met with the lady about 2 days later, and she was very happy with the first issue. I worked with the freelance photographers and freelances, and I had a printer, and I was flying by the seat of my pants. And what does she do? She takes this newsletter to her monthly meeting and hands out copies to some 15 or 20 members who attended this luncheon and says, look what I got. Look what this guy did for me. You know, my investors love it. So a week or two later, I started getting calls, and I got four, five, six, seven calls. And before I knew it, I was in the newsletter business, and it made a living for me for the next 20 years.
Wow,
This was
that's
in
excellent.
Silicon Valley.
So you just kind of stumbled upon that and got this call out of nowhere, and it just led to something big.
Lucky break.
That is incredible. So what was it like? What were some of the kind of pains of struggling to kind of get, balance all this that was coming in from different people who had now kind of these demands placed on you?
Well, and they came from. I got to where I was doing some mailings to companies in Silicon Valley that were too large to not have a newsletter for their employees, but too small to not have an in-house public relations and corporate communications operation. So they would contract with me, and every 3 months or quarterly or whatever, I would do a newsletter for their employees, usually to meet with the human resources director and say, well, we want a story about our picnic. We want a story about the blood drive. We want a story about Jim or Susie, who's been here now for 20 years. And, it was what you would normally find in an employee newspaper or newsletter. And I ended up contracting with other writers because I couldn't handle them all myself. I made a living, but I won't say that that I was raking in the bucks. It was a struggle, but I think there's one experience that I just love, and I have it in my book that characterizes being in business for yourself. I worked out of my house the whole time. I had a bedroom that I used for an office, and I never had any employees. I contracted with other subs. But one day I was having my quarterly meeting with one of the owners of a small high-tech business, and he did. We went through the routine, and as I was starting to leave his office, I said, "Well, I'll get this to you in the next few days." Actually, his name was Tim, coincidentally.
Oh, okay.
And I remember it as if it happened yesterday. And he said, "George, when are you going to get an office?" And of course, I was charging very reasonable rates, about half of what an ad agency would charge to do this same job. So I said, "Tim, whenever you're ready to pay for it." And he said, "Oh, no, 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 no. We like your rates. Just everything's fine." And so I've never had an outside office. I've worked out of my house now since 1983, and I keep my expenses low. And half of my book is devoted to how to make money, and the other half is on how to save money. Because if you're going to be on your own, you can't afford to have an office and furnishings and assistant and all the trappings that go with it. You'll never make it. You have got to cut down to the bone. You have to exercise self-discipline, and you have to only pay and buy those things that are essential. And you have to do that for a good number of years until you can relax a little bit. So that's the gist of my message.
So it's a shoestring budget for a couple of years, and don't get crazy buying that jet or all that good stuff, right?
Yeah. In other words, don't buy anything and don't pay for anything that you don't have to.
There you go. Now you were talking about your book. Are you referring to How to Survive in an Upside Down Economy?
Yes, I am.
All right. Now tell the listeners a little bit about this book, and how did you come about writing it, and what does it really focus on?
Well, those two essentials on how to make money and how to save money, which are critical if you're going to be self-employed. Now, why should you be self-employed? When I started out, it was because the newspaper industry had taken a dive and it was never going to recover, and people were getting laid off, and it was only a matter of time until I was going to be laid off. So I decided, hey, I've got to do something. At that time, I was 50, and I said, who's going to hire me at the pay I'm getting now at the age of 50? So, I realized that I had to do something for myself. And when that occurred to me, I wasn't quite sure how to do it. So I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll fly by the seat of my pants, get advice from friends, and so on. And 20 years later, it occurred to me that, hey, maybe I've got something to offer here. I've gotten through this. I've gone through this minefield, and I like to write, and so I put together this book. Now today, I think that the situation is much more critical for people coming into the job market, as well as for those who at the age of 45 or 50 or 55 find themselves out in the street because they've done hard work, they've done a good job for the company, but the company got absorbed or merged, and now we're going to lay off 5,000 people, and you happen to be one of them. And what do you do if you find yourself on the street, or if you're a young person coming out of school and there are no full-time jobs? One example is I was talking to a friend the other day, and his wife works for a large chain. They have stores all over America. And she was telling her husband that she had referred a few friends to come in and look for work. And they said, yes, we have a job for you. Would you like to work afternoons or evenings, or 10 hours or 15? Or we can even give you 25 hours a week if you like. Well, no, I'm looking for a full-time job. Oh, no, that's not possible here. And so what happens is you have these massive chains that have maybe 10% of their employees, most of them are supervisory, they have full-time jobs, and everybody else is part-time, so they are not required to cover you for benefits. You have no benefits. What are you going to do if you get sick? And so this is a situation today, and this is now what we're calling the gig economy. And you cannot pick up a newspaper or turn on TV or look at your smartphone and not see something about either the sharing economy or the gig economy. And what is the gig economy? It's we can hire you for a limited period of time. But if you're looking for full-time work with benefits, it's not here. Wonderful for business. Oh, they can save millions, if not billions. But what about the poor schnook who is trying to support a family? You know, he or she is up against it. And so my solution to this was and is, and I recommend, self-employment and how to survive. So that's where I'm coming from on this, Tim.
Well, I love this, George, and you broke it down so nicely. And I'm just thumbing through your book, and you sent it to me, and I love it. It's a little over 300 pages, but it's in these kind of small little, I guess you would call it chapters or little segments that's easy to get through. And it is a clear roadmap on how to do things as an entrepreneur. And even like you said, how to save money. And I think this is so needed today because you're right. There are so many people out of work and they're feeling hopeless. And when people are hopeless, man, terrible things happen. And you're giving people some hope with this book of how to survive in an upside down economy. And so what's kind of some of the response and feedback that you've gotten since you've published it?
Well, when you write a book, you think you're going to get a lot of feedback and response, and one doesn't get that much. So there's this I guess, intrinsic satisfaction that maybe you're helping somebody out there. But I want to point out that you read a lot about entrepreneurism, or see or hear, and I'm not pushing entrepreneurism.
Uh-huh.
Because people start thinking about, oh, I'll be the next Facebook, or I'll be the next Steve Jobs. That's great, but it's like back when I was a kid, people that I knew aspired to go to Hollywood, and how many make it? I'm talking about just making a living, being able to support yourself or a family, and not having to worry that you don't have more than a week's resources if there's no money coming in. My wife and I have for years done fixing up rental properties and things like that since we've been, quote, retired. And we have worked with tradespeople for all that time. And basically, with three tradespeople that we are practically they're members of our family because we're on the phone with them and we see them and talk to them pretty much every week. And Tim, these three people, one man is a cabinet maker, carpenter, construction. He can do or build anything, works with drywall. He is always busy. He works for himself. He has no employees. You call him at his home. Another one does air conditioning, heating, light plumbing, and electrical. And the third one does painting and maintenance. And we've been working with these same people for 25 years, and they are always busy. When there was a recession, they were still busy. Uh, in contrast, I met a man who, this is during just after the recession, and he was in the business of selling and installing hot tubs, and he had a good business. He said within 30 days, when the recession started, his business was gone. Everybody called. The first thing they did, they canceled their luxuries. No, we're not going to have that hot tub. And he was his credit was ruined, and he was out of business. During that same time, these three people I talk about, business continued as normal because what they do is they do repairs, essentials. So you're not going to get a new house, but if your air conditioner goes on the fritz in Tucson, you've got to have it fixed. And so those people, those are not glamorous businesses, and the less glamorous, the more dirty, the better you have a chance of success. If you're doing roto-rooting, your phone's always going to ring. I talked to a roto-rooter guy some years ago, and he said, I have a college degree in business, and my friends, tease me because, I'm doing stinky work. But he said, I laugh all the way to the bank.
Well, I was going to say, be ready to roll up your sleeves and just get dirty. And that you're right. Those are the jobs that keep people going because not a lot of people want to continue doing it. And yeah, I mean, you couldn't be more right. Now, what would you say for the listeners out there who are maybe they've just found themselves unemployed? What are some tips that you would have for them in kind of picking themselves up and maybe creating something?
Well, the first thing I would suggest is that they have to bring in some money to pay the rent. So if you just hang up your sign and say, I'm in business, that's not going to do it. So in my book, I mentioned my wife used to have a summer place in Door County, Wisconsin. And for 3 months, it's a lovely place and it's crowded with people and visitors from Chicago. But 8 or 9 months out of the year, it's a deep freeze. And so what do these people do who live there in Door County the year round? Well, they drive the school bus. They go around and contract with people who own cabins and cottages to check on their cabins and cottages every month during the cold period. They work part-time here. They have a part-time this and a part-time that. And what they do is they put together 3 or 4 part-time jobs or temporary jobs to bring in enough money to pay their needs, cover their needs. As an immediate start, that is what I did, and that's what I recommend. Grab whatever you can, part-time, full-time, whatever it is. If it's not a desirable job, take it until you can start building up your business or your little businesses. And you don't have to have just one business. Like, for example, there's a lot of people in this country who are really computer savvy. And, they're the people who their friends call and say, Phil, Susie, could you come over and help me? I can't get my computer going. I'm stuck. And they go over because it's for a friend. But you can do this for a living. And there are very few people where I live who actually hire out to do this. Generally speaking, $50 an hour. and people are happy to pay it because they need their computers. Now, I know more people are on smartphones nowadays, so that may change things a little bit. I still like my desktop, but there are all kinds of little jobs that need to be done, and you can start by doing those, and you might carry 3 business cards in your pocket. And some people are good with plants and flowers, and they put listings in laundromats and places and say, I will take care of your plants, I will sit your house, uh, we will dog sit. There's a book that was written quite a few years ago. It's probably available in every public library, and I'm trying to put my finger on it. It's 555 ideas on how to make money, and there's little jobs that anybody can do. And J. Conrad Levinson, and I mention him in my book. J. Conrad Levinson, Levinson. You can find him anywhere online. He has authored probably 10 or 15 books. He died a couple of years ago. And one of those is the 555 ways. So to do immediately, just grab anything you can. Look online, look on Craigslist, anywhere there's hiring. And one thing to stay away from is these jobs that are posted online, where you have to submit a bid, and you do a job at home that you're going to end up getting $7 an hour. Be very cautious of those.
You're talking about like the Angie's List?
No. Angie's List is fine. And there's actually a lot of local sort of Angie's Lists where if you do window cleaning or this or that, you can get listed and be contacted that way. But whatever you can do, if it's landscape maintenance, computer service, or just anything, but initially, just it will take a multiple group of little part-time jobs to bring in some money. You don't have to sit at home. You do not have to sit at home and feel bad and feel depressed. There is work out there, but it may not be desirable. But pick the ones that you like, that you want to nurture and develop, and work on those while you're doing the drudge work.
Right, absolutely.
And then expand. And then what will happen is you may have 3 different areas where you can serve people, and you'll find that in one of them you excel, and you'll get more calls, and you can drop the others by the wayside, and then say, oh yeah, everybody goes to Tim Laskus for this. Sure, oh, Tim Laskus fixed my this or that. And that's how it goes. And so where we ended up was with the newsletters, and that paid us a living for over 20 years. And then let me go to part 2, is instead of spending money on new cars or new clothes or this or that, I have to admit, I use things until they will no longer work. We have a 1972 washer dryer in the garage. That's our oldest. We drive cars that are 20 or 30 years old. As long as they keep on running, we keep them. And what do we do with the money? We buy property, rental income property, residential, not commercial, but residential, preferably single family, in a neighborhood where, let's say, a postal carrier income would allow him or her to live. And that has been our retirement income. We are not invested in any way in Wall Street or any other investment, but it's all rental income property.
Well, George, it sounds like you've made some smart choices along the way. And just to kind of recap, kind of go back a little bit, it sounded like you were kind of saying, cast your net wide and go out there and do kind of the small service industry type jobs, do multiple things.
Yes.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket, and
Right.
And don't be afraid to roll your sleeves up and just kind of, play small ball. Don't look for that home run. And if you get enough, hits, that eventually you'll get around all the bases, and then you never know which one is going to be, kind of your go-to thing, and then you can just drop the other. So you don't have to have all the ideas of and kind of foresight of what's going to work out, what's going to be your big money producer. Just get out there, start doing, bring in some money from different resources, and go for it. And the rest will just kind of work itself out. And then also, kind of added towards the end is, spend your money wisely. Instead of upgrading to the front loader washing machine and dryer, and spending, I don't know, a couple of $1,000s, take that money and put it into an investment somehow. And you're saying you use what you got till it don't work anymore.
You did an excellent summary, Tim. And I liked your analogy of baseball because I don't know how many people saw the movie Moneyball. I think it won some Oscars. And in Moneyball, this computer nerd who plays that role, he's a young man, convinces the general manager of the Oakland A's. It's a true story. And he said, we don't have money to go out and hire these big sticks. The New York Yankees have all that money. So he said, you don't need to. He said, you want somebody who has an on-base percentage. And they capitalized on that, and they hired these players for a lot less, who had high on-base percentages. And like you say, don't go for the home runs. They went for the hits and the walks.
Now, George, when you were growing up, what did you learn about money? Did you have anyone in your family as a young lad who just said, George, this is how you make money and this is how you saved it? Where did you get this education on money from?
I'm really not sure where it started, but I know this. When I was 11 years old, I had my first paper route. And you were an independent carrier salesman. So you got a bill from the newspaper every week, and you had to pay. And then what was left over was your profit. And when I got started, the first few weeks or months, I didn't have any profit because I wasn't managing things correctly. And I found out how to do that. And for the next 2 years, I had a profitable paper route. But even before then, I think I was inspired. I was about 7 or 8 years old, and my parents used to give me an allowance, 25 cents a week. It was only 9 cents at that time to get into the movies. So one day I was over at a kid's house who was in my class, and they had a little bit of acreage. And there were these mango trees. This was in Miami, Florida. And must have had a dozen mango trees. It was like an orchard. And I got there and I saw all of these mangoes had fallen to the ground and were beginning to rot. And I said, well, what do you do? His name was John Conyers. And I said, what do you do, John, with these mangoes? Well, my folks are busy. They're working. They don't have time. And we just rake them up and put them in the trash. And I said, do you think we could pick up or pick some of the ones that are ripe and go sell them? And he said, well, I'll ask my mom. And she said, okay. So I had a wagon, and we loaded up the wagon with the mangoes, and we went around from door to door, rang bells, and would you like some mangoes? And they were 10 cents a piece. And at the end of the day, we had $3 or $4, which we split. And that was the first time, I think. And that was, I don't know what motivated me at that time, but after that, I told my folks I didn't need an allowance anymore.
Well, it sounds like you had that entrepreneurial spirit from a very young age, and you were figuring it out as you went along. And I think that's how a lot of people learn about money is they learn by watching others, and they just kind of figure it out themselves. And many times people get into kind of dire situations because they didn't have really good role models around them, almost like marriage. Many times we're not really taught of, how to be a good wife or how to be a good husband. We just kind of model others. And if we don't have a good role model, then, we find ourselves in trouble.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not sure that I ever had the role model that I wished I would have. And I've been a volunteer tutor for quite a long time in the public schools here with at-risk kids. And I thought, well, hey, now I can give back. I can do something. But I find that there are not that many people, young people, that really want or looking for a role model. And every time there's a success, which are few and far between, you have a really wonderful feeling.
Yes, for sure. Now, since you've been working for yourself, George, and doing your own thing, so to speak, away from the newspaper industry, that you were working in as a reporter for so long, what was kind of a mental challenging moment that you've had along the way, and how did you overcome it?
Well, I think a few challenges that came along was my wife and I were really wrapped up in the newsletter business, but we were doing what we would call a turnkey. We were taking in laundry, so to speak, and we were doing other companies' newsletters. And we thought, well, maybe we should try to find our own subscription newsletter where we're the publishers, we're the owners, and we have subscribers. And we do that on the side while we're doing the laundry for others and bringing in the income to pay the rent and upkeep overhead. So we started a newsletter which was aimed at the hotel marketing and sales people, and it was tips on how to increase your sales and to avoid vacancy in hotels and motels. And this was aimed at either the general managers, the owners of a smaller property, or the sales managers. And we had mailing lists where we could mail 5,000 at a time to send them samples. And the samples were a 4-page newsletter done in sort of the Kiplinger style. And we had success stories, maybe 16 success stories in every issue, 4 to a page, tightly condensed. And we thought it was a very useful tool, and we got some nice feedback. And we actually, after 2 years, celebrated our 1,000th subscriber, and we thought we were well on our way. But what happened was, what we didn't anticipate was that these subscribers didn't stay very long at their jobs. It was a lot of students right out of college get a job as a so-called sales manager working under the general manager, and they lasted 8 months or so. And so when they left, the next person that came in, of course, figures, well, whatever the person before me did wasn't the right thing, so they did not renew. And we didn't get the renewals we needed. That was short and simple. And after a period of time, we realized that we were riding a dead horse. So we closed it. And then it was an agonizing decision because we had put hundreds of hours of our time into it. It was a good product, and there just wasn't the market that was needed to support it. So it's those kind of things but you have to know. I can't remember who said it. You probably do. When to hold them and when to fold them.
Oh yeah, yeah. Was
And
it Kenny Rogers?
I
I
think
believe
it
that.
was.
Yep.
I think it was Kenny Rogers. And so you have to know.
Yeah, you got to know when to cut your losses, and sometimes we don't persist enough, and other times we hold on way too long, and
Hmm.
like you said, it's beating a dead horse, and that's okay because it's a learning experience. Yeah, maybe that didn't work out, but you learned a lot from it, and to not make the same mistake again. Now, George, what would you say has probably been the most fulfilling moment of this journey of yours?
Um, I would say that any time that we're able to scrape enough together to buy a rental property, and we fix it up and we get a tenant installed who is happy, we always keep our rents usually $200 under the market. And that enables us to get a lot of applicants, and so that we can select and choose someone who is most likely to stay, pay their rent on time, and be considerate of others and so forth. And so when we do that and we've accomplished it, and sometimes it's a 2 or 3 months effort where we're working 7 days a week, but after that we just really feel like we've accomplished something. And it used to be that way too when we get out an issue of a newsletter. You've heard and read that it's not when you get there so much as the getting there. And there's a great deal of satisfaction in overcoming these little hurdles and finally saying, now we've got it. And it's a success. Any success that you can share with another person too. I'm not a loner, and I just value and treasure the experiences that I share with my wife. We've been together for 30 years, and we're a team.
Congratulations. That's incredible. And man, we may have to have you back on to do a couple of different episodes. One's on how to have rental properties, and the other on how to have a successful marriage, because it sounds like you have been very successful at both. But George, this has been great having you on the show. Unfortunately, we run out of time. But before we go, is there anywhere online that people can find you? Where can they find your book? And just how can they connect with you?
Oh, well, the easiest thing is to go to Amazon and enter the title, How to Survive in an Upside Down Economy, or they can enter my name, George Newman, or I do have a little website on WordPress, and if they put in the title, that will probably pop up on the Google search.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, George. Stay cool out there in Tucson, Arizona, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks, Tim. It's been a great experience.
Thank you.
Want more entrepreneurial tips? Go to timlaskus.com.